going. And hear that in the background noise.
Being recorded.
Ah, fantastic. So yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this week's roundtable. Today was going to be a focus on a bit of an interesting topic, a conversation that I had with Emma Morris a little while ago now. We kind of brought this together very much for an open forum. So I want everyone today to know that it is very much an open discussion. Please jump in. Please come in with ideas about what you're doing already. Use the reaction hand kind of raising at any time. Use the chat function. I'll monitor that side. I just want you guys to get talking. To those who I've not met, there's a few new faces, which is always nice to see. My name is Matthew Baird. I've been involved traditionally in social housing recruitment. I've done that for 10.5 years and set up on my own last year. Since then, I've worked with a huge range of providers. Most recently, actually, you'll have noticed on LinkedIn yesterday, Bromsgrove District Housing, which Emma and Graham are with us from today. So I'm doing a big campaign with them, which is fantastic. But over, I'd say lockdown, but it feels like years ago now. I mean, it was, but it feels a lot longer than, what was it, 2, 3? I don't even know anymore. I started doing these roundtables to bring ideas and to get people's voices around the table. Social housing is amazing, and change gets made when people come around the table and work together. But there aren't always enough opportunities to do so. So started putting these together. They've grown, and we're now getting some amazing people coming every single week. And some people only come to the occasional one. So if anyone is looking to be a guest speaker on a future one as well, please reach out. But as I say, Emma and I sat down a little while ago. We did an amazing roundtable a few weeks ago now. If you go back and look on the LinkedIn group on the menstruation policy and what they've been doing around there. But today was focused around community groups. So on that, I'm going to bring Emma in just to kind of introduce where this idea came from, and I guess what would be really useful to try and bring out of today for you.
Fantastic. Morning, everyone. Yes, I'm Emma Morris. I'm Head of People at BDHT. And where do I begin? So for me, diversity inclusion, it's very much part of my role, but it's very much part of who I am, and wanting to see the change and make the change where I can. And at BDHT, we've recently launched our EDI group, so Equality, Diversity and Inclusion group. So I'm coming very much from how does BDHT increase its diversity, and that not again just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's something we believe in, and we know obviously that brings its own tacit benefits. So we have an EDI group, and what became apparent was the people that were coming into the group didn't necessarily have the diversity that would actually start to charge forward what we were wanting to do. And to be really honest, what I can see is very good, well-intentioned people, but perhaps don't have the necessary skills, don't come from the backgrounds that actually we're trying to champion and move forward. At BDHT, we have low diversity, and we're really working on that at the moment. We're embracing the Disability Confidence Scheme and the Rooney Rule. So we're really trying to make strides. But there seems to be, it's quite obvious, how do we reach out to the community networks to invite them to come and talk to us, to enhance our experience? So I'm looking at it very much from a employability point of view. And I know there's other community works that housing do, but for me, this was about how do I show people that BDHT is a great place to come and work, irrespective of who you are, where you're from. It's just so important to me that it's a safe place to work. And I believe we have to bring some of that network in for us to expand our sort of learning, really. So that's what kickstarted this conversation. As I said in the chat, I'm no expert. I don't have the answers. I just really want to start the conversation.
Is anybody, so on that, I mean, and thank you. I think this was part of the joy of the roundtables, and what I wanted to bring forward was a lot of the time it isn't about being an expert in a particular topic. It's about saying, look, this is an important thing that we need to discuss. And I think anybody who was up at the Housing 2022 conference, I think, and if we're talking purely race, never mind other diversity characteristics, will have noticed that there wasn't a huge amount of diversity there. It was very, very white in itself as well. And executive positions and board positions. I'm actually really glad to see Laura Daly with us today, who runs a business called Black on Board, because I know one of her big campaign pieces as well is around trying to improve that level of diversity on board level, but also in housing in general. And so is anybody actually actively working on, or has anybody got any ideas of what they're doing within their own businesses at the moment to either improve diversity or to engage with community groups that perhaps traditionally may have been apart from a housing association, and yet businesses are realizing that if we don't embrace these or work with these, we're not going to get those changes made. Would anyone like to jump in?
I'm happy to.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Fantastic. There's always nerve-wracking going first. So thank you for that. Thanks.
So I'm the community growth manager at Alliance Homes, but I've only just started there. I actually came from Cardiff Community Housing Association. Hi, Sani. So it's probably easier for me to talk a bit about Cardiff Community Housing Association. They went on quite an extraordinary journey in terms of diversity and representation within the organisation, which saw the board completely transform. And I don't quote me on figures, but I think in terms of representation, I think it's just over 60% of the board from ethnically diverse communities, and there was a real focus on from the CEO at the time about making sure that our colleagues or representatives of communities that we served. But it was quite a complex journey in making that happen, but there's so much progress being made in that. But I think so much of it was being present within the communities. It wasn't, the first thing was not to assume that communities were hard to reach, because they most certainly weren't. We just weren't within those communities, and we weren't spending the time and building the relationships and gaining the trust. So that happened at board level, at senior leadership team, and making sure that we were actually speaking to our customers, finding out from them what some of the barriers were.
Did you find those relationships built more effectively when you had a more diverse board, though? Did you feel it was easier for those, or was it always a case of it was more straightforward, but it was just about reaching out?
No, I think it had the two things happened at the same time, really. I think it was, we made a decision that is what we wanted and that was the right thing to happen. But it didn't happen in isolation with any two things. It was throughout the business, and it had to be embedded throughout.
Really interesting. No,
do you want to add any more, Sani?
Yes, I was just going to say, Rhiannon, thank you. And yeah, I work for Cardiff Community Housing myself currently, and yeah, the work that they've done to attract ethnic minority into the business, and they're so focused in identifying that issue in the first place, and then working towards actually improving that diversity. They've come up with several initiatives, and currently they've been really, really successful. And it's not just about the initiatives that they've come up with. They've also gone through their strategic values and the core values to make sure that they attract more ethnic minorities within the housing sector. There's very far and few in between already, but if you're doing a great work and you're putting it out there, and it goes back to things that we've talked about before, housing needs to showcase what it is that they do to the community at a wider scale. And when you're doing that, you're taking the extra effort to communicate to those so to them hard to reach communities, which really they know how to reach. If you spoke their language, they know how to reach if you go into their communities and spoke to them. So CCHA has done fantastic work when it comes to this. You know, when they do the staff survey, for instance, the customer satisfaction surveys, they send it out in multiple languages to identify tenants that spoke different languages, so they make sure they send it to them in the language they understand. Yeah.
Can I move your microphone slightly away? I think it's catching on your beard. That was all. It was just just rubbing against it. That was all. But
sorry about that.
No. Please don't. I think that's really interesting in terms of how. Because if you got involved then with the EDI work as well within the business, what's your role been?
Yeah, so I joined, and from the outset, before I even joined, looking at Cardiff Community Housing as an ethnic minority within the housing sector that has faced racism and had lived experience in the sector for so many years. And you know, at some point I felt like, well, wherever I go in housing, I'm always going to face racism because my skin's always going to be black. Nothing's going to change there. But what really did it for me was looking from the outside, looking at CCHA and their strategy and the pledge to deeds not words from Type Hub, for instance, those are really, really key moments for me to say, actually, when I read that deeds not words, it's what will protect me as an ethnic minority when I do go into this company. And if they do, go by that pledge, it only means I'm going to feel safe. I'm going to be in a safe environment. And what also gave me confidence as well was the Rooney Rule. Knowing I have the skill set, I have the experience in order to apply for that job, I'm going to get an interview because I'm capable of doing that role. Whereas similar roles in other housing associations that I've got plenty of experience in and knowledge, I don't even get an interview. So, and it might be partly because they don't use Rooney Rule, partly because they're not pledged to Type Hub, these not words, and all of this other stuff. But for me, looking in from the outside and applying and not even getting anywhere, it is disheartening. And of course,
as I say, I think that's really interesting because, firstly, massive thank you for your honesty and your candidness there. I think it's incredibly important. But I think also, I've been in recruitment for 10.5 years, and most of that has been within social housing. Not all of it, but the majority of it. And even when I wasn't, I still was working within the wider housing sector. And this is the first time I've worked with a business, and this is working with Bromsgrove. And I went in and met with Emma and the team and the HR team and the other managers just this week. And it was imperative that when we were working together, so look, if you're coming on board, you're working within our practices. And three of those really that were really important. Number one was the Rooney Rule. It's the first time I, as a recruiter, have ever been asked to work to the Rooney Rule, which in itself is quite mind-blowing. Number two was the disability conference, which we talked about previously, and making sure that there is no discrimination in any way, shape or form. I think one of the reasons we partnered together in the first place was because they knew that would never be an issue, but it was still there. And number three was anonymizing CVs. And there's a huge piece around anonymizing CVs and unconscious bias and everything that goes with it. And I've actually argued with other recruiters, with businesses, with companies left, right and centre around this. And it doesn't take much. If you just Google anything to do with unconscious bias in recruitment, the amount of times, the amount of studies that have gone on that have shown that you can have 100 people in each, 100 anonymised, 100 that aren't, and send them to recruiters and get them to shortlist. Those numbers are always different. And the impact that has, and I think it's something where my industry, certainly in the recruitment side, but also housing and anyone in HR do need to put their hands up and go, okay, but if this is happening, how do we fix it? And it's really great to hear that actually, when you went into Cardiff Community, that Rooney Rule actually empowered you to even apply in the first place. And that's really, really important. I think sometimes it's messages like that are so important that ring through the sector. Certainly it shows it rolls with yourself, Sammy.
Yeah, it's not only did they empower me to apply, knowing I had the confidence that I should get an interview, and then in that interview I have to showcase myself to be the best in order to get the job. So it's those things that gives that peace of mind when I did apply. And on top of that, moving forward, I could remember, and you probably saw my post on LinkedIn when I first joined, and I had a conversation with Hayley, the CEO, and I was informing her and letting her know that I will be holding her accountable into the digital words and all of these strategies that they've put in place and that work. And fast forward to a year later, almost, I can almost say to you, they've done get into housing project for ethnic minorities, which they're currently doing at the moment, in partnership with 7 other housing associations, but CCHA themselves are leading on that program. They've got get into board project as well, which is again partnership with other housing associations. CCHA are also leading the project on that as well. So the work that they're doing, the CEO is really focused. And as part of the Race Equality Action Group that I'm part of, we've identified ways of improving our employment, retaining, and also making sure that the ethnic minorities that are coming in are feeling inclusive and they're feeling part of the team when they do come in. And all of those things is really, really improve the whole working environment at CCHA. And one of the prime example, the result that we had from the Race Equality Action Group allowed us to have extra annual leave a year, because we all know we celebrate Christmas in every organizations, but if you have more diverse talent and ethnic minorities, some people celebrate Diwali, they celebrate Eid, they celebrate all these other festivities, Hanukkah and all of that, but we don't recognize them. People have to take their own annual leave in order to attend those festivities. So with CCHA, with the CEO actually at the focus of this Race Equality Action Group, she was able to take that recommendation to board. The board accepted it. We got extra annual leave from that. So it just goes to show, if you're putting the effort into doing something and you really mean it in a meaningful way, you will make progress.
I mean, that's absolutely brilliantly put. And actually, it seems to, I'm going to just mute that. It seems to me like we've got a number of different views. I think it's really important that this is something that we really focus on to begin with. I do want to just jump to the chat, and Graham, I'm going to bring you in on this because I want you to elaborate slightly on this one. But because you and I have talked a number of times, and actually when I ran Lara and I ran this was a little while ago, about breaking the glass ceiling, about getting more executives into positions, more EDI in your executive positions within social housing. And we had maybe 30 people on the table. It was a very, very, very busy round table. And actually, Graham and I were the only people who were white on the entire thing, even though we reached out. And so it spoke volumes. And Graham's put there in the chat, it says, they seem certainly to yourself like blunt tools, but without more understanding and awareness, blunt tools are necessary. And you look forward to not being able to use them because the culture is ingrained. So can you just elaborate a little on that, on what you mean in terms of a blunt tool within this? Because I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
No, I think Emma said it at the start, you can go to plenty of groups and, clearly my background is very traditional for a chief exec in housing associations. And you go to groups and I constantly check myself about am I just being well-intentioned? Do I just have it's all very well having the well-intentions, but how do I actually make a difference? How do I make it that there is more genuine diversity and not in a tokenistic way? And anyone who is in our positions reflects on that, I think, a lot of the time, because I don't want it to be seen as something we're just having a go at. It's important. It's really important to Emma. It's really important to me. And so when we've talked about things like the Rooney Rule, does it feel like a blunt tool? Yeah, of course it does. But the Rooney Rule was brought in to fundamentally change at that time what was going on in American football, where almost 60-70% of the talent on the field was from a black or black background, fundamentally a black background, and yet no coaches ever were. And you only have to go to this country and see the same in football in this country, for example. So it does feel like a blunt tool, but there's an absence of almost anything else. And so I do think we will welcome the day. And what's happened at BDHT is it started lots of conversations about the way that we perceive people coming in terms of their recruitment, what their skills are, what their skill sets are, how they use language, and all those things that are rightly meant to challenge us. So we're looking forward to the day where we don't have to do the Rooney Rule, because it'll just become ingrained. But at the moment, it feels like those rules, whether we want to call it positive action, whatever we want to call it, we need to fundamentally rebalance the playing field. And these feel like, at the moment, the only tools that we can use.
Really, really appreciate it. And I think I'm not disagreeing with you at all. Sally, let me bring you in.
And I think you're right, it is a blunt tool. However, if the impact that it had on me, even taking the step to apply and having that peace of mind that I will be given an opportunity to showcase myself. And at that point is when I know then I have to do my best when I'm given the opportunity. And should I be worried that I should be given an opportunity in the first place? Well, I have the right to be given the opportunity because I had the skills, I got the experience, and I'm not applying for jobs that I'm not capable of doing based on my experience and background. But the only thing that stops me majority of time is the name comes up, Sani Oladimeji Salis, yeah, just put it to the side. And that does happen. And, you know, it does saddens me, because I've applied for similar jobs, similar roles and everything in other organizations, and I just don't get that opportunity. But to be given the opportunity based on a Rooney Rule, knowing that I've got the skills and experience, because don't forget, you don't just like block somebody just because they're ethnic minority and they can fill that gap and you can tick the box. They have to meet the criteria of that job as well.
But I think it's also really important we have conversations like this. I was astounded. So I met my girlfriend on New Year's Eve 2020, which is the weirdest New Year's Eve because nothing was open, so we just went for a walk. But you know, and her name was Katie Goodwin, and okay, great, no worries at all. Knew she was mixed race. We met on Hinge, I think, on the app. Anyway, and her middle names were Ocean Kemi Ifalafoshe, and I was always kind of like, well, why haven't you know, not why haven't you got your father's name? Anyone can have whatever name, but in terms of their parents decided kind of growing up that they were always going to give their children British sounding names and have their, I guess, more cultural identity in their middle names. But also that she told me at the age of 16, she'd done mock interviews in school and was told that while she did brilliantly, she needs to straighten her hair next time because that's more professional. So if we don't think that this is still something, and that was 13, 14 years ago, so we don't think this is something still going on now, then you know, that in itself is different. So, you know, we look at, I know last week's roundtable was on branding and awareness, and actually what our messages are telling those who are applying for jobs and telling our businesses, and obviously telling anybody within our company who already works there. And it's great to hear Sani talk about the fact that he holds his own business to account continually in terms of those you know, messages that they're putting out there. But I think it's also really important that we realise when we're doing the things like the Rooney Rule, or when we are talking more openly, I like what you mentioned there about different kinds of annual leave because of different faiths and denominations. That sends a message to our existing staff as well, that they are welcome, and actually if they want to reach out then to their own community, I know one of the initial discussion points in this was about community, they will then reach out to their own community, go, actually, that you're welcomed here. You know, I'm actually felt very welcome where I am, the environment I'm in is very welcome, this is a place you want to work, and I think that will help expand it. Tom, I'm going to bring you in, then Marie.
Yeah, hi guys, good morning all. From my side, from a commercial perspective, I don't do a lot of recruitment at this stage because I'm not in that level. But the Rooney Rule, I haven't heard much about this before. Is this now becoming, is it a go-to where it's actually advertised in the job role that it is a Rooney Rule position, or is it advertised as it's compulsory now for any local governments or non-profits who do it?
It's entirely kind of choice-based. You know, you can implement it or not. It basically just means that if your skill set meets the criteria and you're from an EDI background, then you will be guaranteed an interview. Is a long and short, or you'll at least be shortlisted through to the next stage, or whatever stage that looks like, depending on your recruitment process. But it will guarantee you get the opportunity then, rather than
it's so sad that they have to actually make that a rule, isn't it? It's actually that even has to be an option. It is, but
like I said, the thing came from American football, and it came from the area where, as Graham mentioned before, it was very much, you know, incredibly white coaches everywhere. I'm going, well, hang on, is this just because? And a lot of time you're finding no one was getting an interview. And I know when we've had previous roundtables with Lara and Arthur and Graham and Hazel and others have been on before, the thing that came through a lot of the time was that people were just giving up on applying anymore because they never even got an interview. And I'm sure Sani will come back to that. Marie, I'm going to bring you in, then Sani, I'll come back to you.
Hi, so what I was going to say is we've spoken about how can housing attract the very best talent in our podcast for our Housing Week this season. And I know, Matt, you had a lot of contribution towards how we can attract the best talent. But I think what we need to look at is how we can tap into other areas in equality and diversity. For example, special education needs, people with disabilities. Now, I know those people in HR are very open to that, but it's the support that's needed to help them integrate within an organisation. And I just wanted to give a mention, there is funding through Access to Work through DWP for those organisations that do want to look at either the work environment or any additional amendments they need to do as part of occupational health to help those people. But that's a huge talent pool that, you know, that organisations can benefit from. So I just thought it's worth raising that there is funding out there to help attract the best talent, because the best talent may be somebody that's got a disability, for example. That's just what I want.
And that's where, no, I completely agree. And thank you for sharing. I think there's a huge piece around how accessible is your interview process? How accessible is your application process in general? And I know this is something which BDHT and others have always looked at, but I do feel that, and even when you have stuff like the white paper that's come out where said your tenant voice needs to be a part of everything now, you know, let's be fair, you go back a few years, tenant voice wasn't really ever on board papers. Now it always is. And I feel like this level of inclusivity and what you've mentioned there is absolutely vital, because you're completely correct. But it's, again, I think it'll probably go back to what Fanny mentioned before, which is that's great, but how comfortable were people from those backgrounds in applying in the first place? Emma, I'm going to bring you back in.
Thank you. I was just picking up on some comments there. I mean, there's a really good point around CVs and applications, I can't say anonymity. Oh, I said it. And the Rooney Rule. So level 1 for me is anonymous CVs. But I think what you have to be mindful of are people are very clever. So even, let's say, you know, Matt, you talk about your girlfriend's name, Kate Goodwin comes through. People will pick up on whether the education was in this country. It goes much further than just the name. So for me, there is a huge piece of work that goes back to the unconscious bias, goes back to the buy-in from managers, that when they're looking at CVs, it's not just, I want the most articulated application form that is in essence going to be what we were doing 10 years ago. Because if somebody could write fluently and really sell themselves, it was almost as if that was the best candidate. And I think for me, the biggest myth is that the best application is going to be your best applicant, because it's really not. So I think you've got to see past just that and anonymizing the CVs to really make sure that when your managers are looking at skills, education and background, they're not going, hang on a minute, that was in Israel. And is that mathematical qualification as good as it would be here? I hear that quite a lot. So HR, senior management team and the managers were working to slowly educate people about the bias that is beyond the name. So I think the Rooney Rule is that next level, because absolutely what's so important here, and Sunny said it, is that people from, you know, the diverse community groups, they are massively talented, you know, and they shouldn't need this step up. I am proud that we can give it to them and say, we are here for you and you deserve this. You absolutely deserve this. And I'm so proud it's something that BDHT are doing. And of course, you know, like Graham, we would like it not to be there, but for us, it will be there for as long as it's needed until we feel that we can safely say we're in that position. And who knows if you ever can say that in the world that we're in at the moment.
And this is again, there's sometimes the battle, isn't it? Which is, you know, you want to be proud of the fact you're doing this, but equally you're kind of going, I shouldn't have to. But it's if you don't, then nobody else is. So it's a difficult balance. I'm going to go through some of the comments and then bring Fanny in. Arthur, there needs to be the structure of support in place that follows recruitment, opportunities to challenge from within, education, etc., so the recruitment doesn't feel tokenistic. Couldn't agree more. And I know Bourneville are doing an awful lot there in terms of what you're trying to do. But again, you're having the same issue of trying to attract local talent, and it's getting the message out there. And this is why I'm always talking to businesses about branding, about LinkedIn, about their Facebook. What are you actually telling customers? Because you can tell the housing world you're doing X, Y, Z. They're not the people who are always seeing, actually, if they're applying for the roles, what your business is all about. They're asked about the Rooney Rule versus anonymised application. So thank you for covering that one, Emma. And she agrees with Arthur. Any policy needs to be followed through post-recruitment, otherwise it's meaningless, which I really liked the Sally point there about being able to hold his own business to account was superb. Arthur, anonymised CVs is our preferred, removes risk of tick box interviews. And Tom has mentioned that personally I go for anonymised, completely even the playing field. And this is what's bizarre, is we're talking about it here and I was like, yeah, that sounds great. I've never been asked to do it as a recruiter in 10.5 years. Literally never. This is the first time. to the point where I went to Emma and said, okay, great, how would you like it anonymizing? Are we taking just the name off? Do you want the education taken off with schools? Do you want businesses taken off in case they've worked for, I don't know, their father's, whatever it will be, or whatever bank? All of these things matter, and we're, you know, trying to make sure we get it right. Joe Lucky, lovely to have you with us, Joe. I suppose that anonymised application CVs can still become subject to unconscious bias because there may be clues there in terms of ethnicity. So I probably should have read that before I made my point. So that's great. And that's what I'm thinking about in my field. I'm often reminding people that removing name is not the only thing that makes someone identifiable. Rhiannon, there are separate things I guess. Anonymized CVs to prevent discrimination, practically increasing diversity. You're right, they are separate, but I think it's just getting a chance to have people coming through the door. Sally, I'm going to bring you back in, but yeah, if anyone wants to jump in, please do. I want to hear more voices. This is brilliant.
Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to add that as part of the work that CCHA has been actively and proactively doing, they've, you know, they understood where they were at the beginning, so they understood the data of their customer base, the percentages that are from the ethnic minorities. So that gave them the basis of what they needed to start with, and that allowed them to change their board when it was at the right time. Now, as Rihanna mentioned, they now have 60% ethnic minority on their boards. And then looking at the workforce as well, they've gone from 7% now to 19%, as you know, in over a year period. And that's not just churning staff over, that's actually recruiting when it's at the right time and recruiting the right people and the right skills. From that, it's benefited the business massively, that communities that weren't able to communicate with CCHA properly before because perhaps language barriers and things like that, with the workforce that are coming in, they speak community language. And that's another thing that we need to understand within housing sector. Majority of people, perhaps, that come from ethnic minorities might speak more than one language, which means they can support your team that are having had communication. You don't need to get interpreters and things like that. You've got that skill set within your house, within your workforce. Use them to the, you know, of course, they have to be comfortable in wanting to do that work as well. So let's not forget that. We don't just pile the pressure on them, but you have to be aware of all of those things, and that creates a much more better working environment, and it allows the company and the business to actually thrive within the communities that they serve. I just wanted to add that, just to, you know, let's not forget the positives that come from doing this work and how housing can become better.
I couldn't agree with you more, Sunny. I think what was really interesting, we ran a live roundtable at Housing 2022 at the end of day one, which I know a few people here were able to attend, which was fantastic. And that was about apprenticeships and how we can use apprenticeships to engage with our communities better, but also our tenants better. And it's amazing how there's some businesses out there that are really using apprenticeships as their first point of call for all their recruitment. And the first place to go to is their tenants, because if they don't feel that their tenants are represented within their business, as you've mentioned, in terms of languages, in terms of foot in the door, in terms of whatever that might be, if you can get, you know, the young people, or, you know, I mean, you get adult apprenticeships as well, but certainly young people who are already living within your stock and don't know necessarily about actually what you do as a housing provider into your business, and you increase it from the bottom up, then you get the follow through. You really, really do. I'm going to go to some of the comments. So Hazel, Bromford are addressing EDI by setting up groups managed by our CEOs to look at internally at our challenges that colleagues may face. The outcomes from these can be used to hopefully make us a more attractive employer as we scrutinise our ability to respond to EDI. So that's brilliant. I'm going to jump back to Lara's in a minute. I'm going to bring Lara in on that point because I think it's really interesting. Claire, how are the EDI group members being chosen and found, Hazel? So we'll come back to Hazel actually on that in a moment. And Tom, Lara, curious as to why your view on anonymising is not a good idea. So Lara, I'm going to bring you in. I've got to say we're 35 minutes in and I haven't heard you yet. So I was like, you're patiently sat in the background. So great to have you with us, Lara. And please do explain why you're not in favour of anonymised CVs.
Hi, I came to observe today, but you know, Lara being Lara. My objection with anonymous is twofold. I mean, I think it's a great idea, but then I think it can backfire. The reason number one is the name alone doesn't identify your race. I have my best mate is called Linda Smith. She's a black woman whose parents came from Jamaica. So what difference does that make to anything? I have another friend who's called Janet Afere. Afere is a Yoruba, it's a Nigerian name. She's a white woman. She was married to this guy, dumped him and kept his surname because it's more interesting than Smith. So names alone don't identify your ethnic background. So that's my first point. And then it's like the discussion that people have had is, well, how much do you anonymize on the CV? Now, the fact that someone studied in South Africa, does that mean they're white or black? What does it tell you? Or the fact that they studied in Ghana, there might be an English person. You know, there's so many, we make so many judgments based on what we see. We might as well just see the full story. That's rather than trying to...
I completely agree. I certainly agree and think that would be where I'd love to be. I think the problem you have is that, and this is coming from people I've worked with, never mind businesses, is that, and this has come from some businesses I've worked with who said, oh, because they see something on a CV, and because of that, and we've talked quite a bit about institutionalized racism and throughout the UK and England and the rest of it, is if people see a reason not to interview someone or someone that isn't maybe like them, isn't their box, isn't their, actually, you know what, there is a white name and there is that, so I know what I'm doing with them, that's great, they'll be fine. Well, they won't even shortlist that other person to get to interview. And I think therein comes that whereas actually, and you'll know this yourself, you have someone who comes in for an interview regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, sexualization, whatever. Sexualization, wrong word, sorry, Matt. You know, I think it's just getting someone the opportunity to come in and actually talk about the role in the first place. And that's where then you need to make sure your interview processes have got some HR and are stringent enough that you're giving a fair opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that and I get that completely, but I'm sort of already living in that post-discriminatory world that's in my head, because my view is if you don't like what you see on my CV and you're not going to shortlist me because of my name or because you think I'm a Muslim or because you think I'm XYZ, then I don't want to work with you. So that's my approach. Is like, if you don't like me, then I don't want to work with you anyway. And I know that doesn't work for everyone because some people are desperate to get into a sector or into a job. And I think I have the luxury of where I am today to take that approach. But my view is if you're going to discriminate against me as a Black woman, then I'm not going to apply to work in your organization. I need to go elsewhere. So that's why I've said.
No, and I mean, I back you completely. I think there's still that element though. And as you've mentioned there, and I guess the flip side of it would be, you always still backed yourself enough to go, well, I'm still going to apply. And I think some people, if they've been knocked back a lot and don't have that confidence, might not apply. Sani, I'm going to bring you in because this is brilliant.
I think Lara absolutely smashed it in a sense, and of course, if you're going to get discriminated against because of your name or because of your perhaps religion or whatever, then you don't want to work in that company. That's great. You have to be empowered as a person to already have that mentality to say, no, I know what my value is and what I need. However, this flip side to that is sometimes you might need a job for progression or for financial reasons and things like that. And your name could be that barrier. And that's where the fine line, which we have to sort of look at. But absolutely agree with you, Lara. It is a great mindset to have that. Yep, I don't want to work in an organization where I don't feel welcome because of perhaps the hiring manager, you know, their biases and things like that. But yeah, it's just that having an understanding of that or the aspect of the need of wanting to apply for a job because of financial or progression, which is also as equally as important as somebody that is already empowered, that know that they've got other opportunities that is available to them. Because let's not forget that also comes with privileges. So like if you've already at the height of in your career and you've had good networks and all of those things, so you've got better access to somebody that's coming from the ground up, and that is where anonymity is a little bit more better for that sort of person and that type of roles, so they can at least showcase themselves at an interview. But I absolutely agree with you.
I know it'd be awful, Sani, but would you feel more comfortable applying for a role if you could apply anonymously than you could with your name still at the moment, despite your experience in housing?
I'm actually, you know, I second what Laura said said in the sense that I'm much more comfortable in my skin now. If it's 5 years ago, yeah, I would rather be sort of anonymous. But now I think most people are aware of who I am in the housing sector, especially in Wales. Of the network, I've been around here and there. So I've had conversations, meaningful conversations, and tried to change the way we do things, represent type up in their deeds, not words. So that encompasses majority of housing associations in Wales. So for me, the work that I believe I'm doing is giving me that empowerment to say, actually, I can choose and say, yes, I'm going to work here, or no, I don't want to work here. And if I go into somewhere, it's because I feel like I've got I can empower myself to become better at that organization and actually transform them to become better as well. Because as I said,
kudos,
it's about
massive kudos to CCHA for giving you that power and making you realise that, because that's amazing. I'm going to go on to Rhiannon, and then we've got comments, but thank you, Sani. Rhiannon, I'm going to bring you in.
Thanks. It just picking up on what Lara and Sani were saying, I think one of the difficulties is, and I'm kind of focusing on Lara's point about if you wouldn't want to work for that organisation, but a lot of the barriers is the hiring manager who is shortlisting, which is not then necessarily the culture of the wider organisation. And in many organisations, I've seen such an inconsistency in the way that hiring managers approach recruitment. Some really want to value and celebrate diversity, and others, it's not their focus point at all, regardless of who our customer base is. And I guess for some who, going to back to CCHA in particular, some of the newer colleagues we've had that have come in that have completely transformed the way the organisation's culture is, to give that opportunity, have that opportunity to be able to come in and then address that. That's been amazing, but we would have missed opportunities along the way, possibly depending on the hiring manager.
And I think that, like I say, that comes down to then the training. There's still, I guess, that balance between the culture of the business. While Lara's just getting sorted, Emma, I'm going to bring you in on that because I know this is something that's really important to you.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to, and I know you mentioned it briefly, but it's going back to the CV, and it's not just about whether somebody's race is visible on that application form. You can see it in certain sectors. So dare I say it to my asset management colleagues, female male bias is definitely in there. People will look for career breaks. They will look for, why has that person started their career later, for example? The experience isn't as great. So there are so many ways in which that bias just comes through, and there is, absolutely talking about race, but it is through so many different ways. It can even be through backgrounds now. We can look on LinkedIn, we can look on Facebook where people live, how much somebody earns. Why is that even relevant to where the job that they want to do now? It's just through, and it goes back to the hearts and minds, like we were just talking about, that you could have a cracking recruiting manager, but if you've got 90 others who aren't, that person that comes into the organisation is just going to feel that it's tokenistic. And for me, and I know for Graham, there's so much work to do about, once you walk through our door, we say bring your whole self to work, and we've got to really mean it, because my biggest fear is that I champion renewal, champion diversity, inclusion, and somebody comes to me and just says, it's not real, I don't feel it, you've got me here, your interview was great, but now I'm here, I'm in my induction, I'm in my probationary, and it doesn't mean anything. That to me is just awful, and I know we've got a lot of work to do, even down to the ergonomics of the office. Have we got places for people to pray? Have we got places for people to breastfeed? Have we got those areas that people are telling us they might need? Can we be flexible with our hours? There is so much more that we need to do. And, I'm just really enjoying the conversation today as well. I just wanted to say.
I think on that, the important thing, more than anything, is that right in this room at the moment, I've got the head of people and the chief executive of business coming together going, A, I want to learn and see if anyone else has got ideas, but B, we know we're not there yet. We're going to get there. What do we do? And if we just had that throughout the housing sector, never mind other sectors, the change would be there. You'd make change, and equally then you would get a whole cohort of people coming through from other backgrounds. I think the fact you wanted to put this on today and is there is a big kudos in itself, and that's not me blowing smoke to you guys, but it's going, this is what we need from the sector as a whole. Lara, I'm going to bring you back in, and then I'm going to go on to the chat. There's a load of messages to go through. So I muted you while you were answering the door.
Yes, I'm taking deliveries for all my neighbours' packages. Yeah, so I want to build on the point that Emma said, which is about it being genuine, because my view is trying to anonymise or get people to anonymise their CVs is putting the focus on the victim. It's a bit like, you know, when you talk about domestic violence, you remove the victim, it's they're responsible to change things. Where I think organisations need to be genuine in what they're doing. And then when people like me and Sunny rock up with our, you know, non-English names, it makes no difference, because that's not what you're looking at, because that's embedded in the culture of the organisation. So that's my view. It shouldn't be for the candidates to amend themselves. It should be for the organisations to be genuine in their openness about what they're looking for, which is your skills and your abilities rather than anything else.
And I think a lot of the time that comes from training, and I know that's something that you guys and others are working on at the moment, because as we mentioned, unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is unconscious. So you do kind of go, I know when I'm going through CVs, I genuinely spend 30 seconds to a minute probably on the CV, and then it's a yes or no, yes or no. But that's from 10.5 years that I've been trained by some people who are great and some people who are awful at what I'm looking for in a CV. Because often it's, if you see a bunch of spelling mistakes, originally it was, if you see a bunch of spelling mistakes, they're no good, just move on. And you don't get a chance to actually look at what this person does. And it doesn't take into account dyslexia or learning difficulties or any of that kind of stuff. So there is definitely stuff to be done. And I know that BDHT and others don't use CVs for that exact reason. They use more of an application form, but still that has its own barriers. I'm going to run through some of the chat and then actually come back to Hazel's point, because I'm aware we're running out of time, which is mad because this is flown by. So yeah, Joe mentioned affinity bias and attribution bias is an issue. Couldn't agree more. And Arthur's elaborated on why do we even care what school a candidate went to? Does anyone even check? A lot of places don't. Some places still do, and I think therein lies the problem. I can see it both from both sides. Completely anonymized CVs are difficult to achieve, and I'm cynical and believe people will consciously or not look for clues. But also, if the only thing that's important for the job is your experience and knowledge, then surely we should only have that information used for shortlisting. And again, these are bigger questions that certainly need answering. Thomas said depends on the role, Arthur. If it's junior or entry, then I guess education does matter. And then they've had a wonderful discussion between them, so that's great. Innovation could help, like the skilled platform Maria's mentioned. I'll come back to you on what the skilled platform is. Bit of talk for did you find similar bias when you were looking? Thomas asked, no, I'm calm. Clara said, I love that you mentioned breastfeeding too, Emma. It's not just about race, but so many different life experiences. And a lot of people backing up Lara with what she said. Tom likes you'll bring your whole self to work. Raising awareness of unconscious bias is an element of Joe's customer service program, which if you haven't worked with Joe, please reach out, because it's genuinely fantastic around culture. I'm going to, like I said, because we've only got 10 minutes left, and I know this whole piece around CVs is probably a whole nother roundtable in itself. Asked earlier, so Hazel mentioned regarding, the EDI group. Confident of addressing the EDI by setting up groups managed by our CEOs to start to look internally at our challenges that colleagues may face. These outcomes from these can be used to hopefully make us a more attractive employer as we scrutinise our ability to respond to EDI. And I know Claire asked kind of how that was coming about and how it was being selected. So Hazel, if you'd be happy to share with us just in terms of how they've come about, that'd be fantastic.
Of course, Matt. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm Hazel O'Halloran and I'm the homelessness lead at Bromford. And I haven't been able to join these calls for a while, so it's really cool that I can today due to a system fault. So actually, it's not the fault anymore because I've been able to do something nice. Yeah, essentially, our chief officers all decided that they would take on a responsibility of EDI. So looking at things like age and gender, health and well-being. There's all sorts of different categories, LGBTQ+, looking at community inclusion, etc. So they've all taken on a lead role in one of these areas. And what they've done is, Claire, your question was around how have we kind of encouraged colleagues to be part of this and how are they recruited? Essentially, it's completely voluntary. And what we've done is we've hooked in some of these EDI sessions onto kind of national days, so like Pride, for instance, and we've just, made it part of work every day. So we're really pulling in on what's available, what's going on in the media at the time, and just encouraging colleagues to really have an open mind to so many different areas. And it is completely voluntary for them to attend. The groups are kind of in their infancy at the moment. They've been set up, I'd say, between sort of 3 and 4 months. So what we're trying to do, I'm part of the age and gender group, but we're actually looking at trying to find kind of 3 key areas. So for instance, we have just agreed to send 16 of our female workforce on an accelerated career program. So that's new for us to do that. And then on the back of that, we're going to then extend that into mentoring. So there's all sorts of different ways that we can really try and look at this and try and break down some of the stigmas that are attached to those things as well. So for instance, somebody said, well, mentoring is going to be for young people who are new into the industry. Not at all. I'm a mentor for the Housing Diversity Network, and my mentee last year had been in housing for 30 years, longer than I have. And actually, you know, and after that, you know, course with the Housing Diversity Network, actually they did really well out of this, and they've actually got a promoted role, and it's fantastic. But we need to stop that stigma about what does this look like, you know. And as Emma said, yeah, it's so much wider about life experiences, and everybody is an individual, and we very much, you know, what Tom was saying, we bring our whole self to work. We're very much about that in Bromford. But Matt, just really interestingly, I was just Googling on our own Bromford site, because we have something called Belong at Bromford. And of course, today a lot has been around recruitment and attracting talent. And we don't have anything about EDI on there. So actually, I'm going to take that back, because we're missing a trick here with the groups that we're setting up to scrutinise what we're doing within our organisation, but we're not actually telling anybody else we're doing it. So actually, we've got a real big gap there. And I think we need to get a bit bolder about that and put that on our website.
I think this actually, and this isn't just yourself, this is something across the sector, because people, I mean, you've been on a number of these roundtables with me, and it's been brilliant to have you for so many of the journey. But one of the things I'm constantly trying to do is go, how do we get that voice louder? What do we need to do? And branding is such an easy way to do it. And yet, as you say, you know what you're doing, your colleagues know what you're doing, your tenants don't, some of them might do, but because it's not out there in that big wider world. And also, as Sanny's mentioned, you know, before, when he was saying, if he suddenly saw that on your website, on your careers page, you've got this, he's more than likely, you know, you'd be more likely to apply. And if you don't see it, if you don't see that inclusivity that you know you've got within the business, you are then, you're missing a trick, because you've done the hard work. Just talk about it. And it is something that drives me a little bit crazy, but equally it's something that, this is why it's so important that roundtables like this go on, because if you don't talk about it, you never realize you're not doing it. And I know the work you've done with LGBTQ and everything else. I think it's really interesting that actually a friend of mine who's worked in property development for years has gone, how could I go about setting up something for the homeless LGBTQ community? Because it is massive. How do I support that? And so we got talking and having a chat. And yet there are businesses like yours already doing it, and people didn't know it was there. So that's brilliant. Marie, I'm going to bring you in, then I'm jumping back to Emma.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, so just to say, Skilled is actually an automation recruitment platform. So basically you can build in there the competencies that are either desirable or essential for a role, and through automation, Skilled can help that remove those biases, basically. So, and I know there's a number of other sort of recruitment platforms out there, and it's finding the right one for you, but that was one that I'd come across that I thought was really excellent in terms of making the recruitment process more transparent, if you like.
Excuse me, Marie, it's fine. But no, I appreciate it. Thanks very much. No, really good to hear about things like this. And I think it's anything, any innovation tech out there that's breaking down these barriers is huge. Emma, I'm going to go to you, and then I've got a point from Rhiannon that I really want to kind of come back to as well. So Emma, to yourself.
Yeah, it was just a quick one, and I'm surprised. I'm giving kudos to Graham for staying quiet, because I think our website isn't where he would want it to be when it comes to recruitment, and we definitely don't showcase who we are and what we're trying to do. So it's such a valid point, and it goes back to, you know, just very quickly, the EDI group. We said, right, let's reach out to the community. Let's try and bring some of the learning in. Let's go to the community groups. Well, if their first point of call is your website, it's like, well, why am I going to work with you? You know, why would I want to come in and help, other than actually your website is pretty desperate at the minute. So it's so important that we really start to showcase the work that we're trying to do. I just really wanted to stress that point.
No, and I think again, it's one of those things that you take away from events like this. And I know Lara and I and others who've been on other events before have said that actually, if you are having an interview panel, there is always someone in the business who isn't white who can be on that interview panel, and you'll be amazed about the difference that can make, because someone can come in And certainly when I did the roundtable on breaking the glass ceiling, the point that was made there was, if I walk in and I see an all white panel, regardless of if I don't see anybody who isn't white, I'm immediately on the back foot. Even if it's just a tiny bit, you lose that little bit of confidence. You go, is this a place for me? And if that's the case, then what you then find, unfortunately, is that interviews are often a confidence. And so if someone is a little bit more unsure, you don't interview as well. And that was just a point that came up that I hadn't considered as much, but they came up on some of the previous roundtables, and was really, really interesting to hear, because there were always board members or other members of the senior exec team or other managers who actually might just be good to get them some experience. Rhiannon has said, just moving away from recruitment, at Alliance Homes, we're focusing on ensuring that our community investment has a real focus on EDI. We're encouraging applications for funding from underrepresented groups and customer panels that are diverse to share your decision making. Tom's back to me, thank you. And Joe has said, I worry that recruitment platforms that focus on key competencies favour people who are good at writing applications. I agree, it's the same as writing good exams. Nam, I've loved hearing some of the ideas about inclusivity in the workplace. In my previous job, I championed cultural events and started a campaign to get the customers to wish the company to wish their customers happy Eid, or I don't want to mispronounce this, Fasiaki, apologies if that was butchered, as we had a good-sized Asian customer base, something that the company took forward and the customers acknowledged. The company moved massively in that area. And our cultural food events on the diverse workforce, it did so much for staff morale and belonging. And Emma's mentioned there, we are focusing more on attitudes and behaviours, and saying that Bournemouth Village Trust. Just with the last minute, I just wanted Rhiannon just to quickly kind of elaborate on the encouraging applications for funding from underrepresented groups. So what does that look like? How has that kind of been implemented?
It hasn't yet. So within our community investment team, we've just brought together a customer panel. Prior to that, decision making around, so we have micro grants for community groups to apply for. We're soon going to be launching our participatory budgeting pot and around our social value. But it was decisions were internally made. So obviously we're bringing in a customer panel, but we need to make sure that customer panel is diverse. So it has to kind of come through the business in every single level to our customers at the end of it. And again, it's that kind of bottom up. We know that's going to start influencing other areas of the business, and we're going to be real advocates of change, and trying to disrupt that change. So it's just so important. But again, in terms of some of the things that I kind of hear kind of going into different organisations, it's like, we're predominantly white, why do we need to do it? And we've kind of talked a lot in Alliance Homes about, it doesn't necessarily have to be representative, it's right to be diverse, whether we know that's our customer base or not. So we lead with that. So we just want to make sure we're bringing it into individual elements of the business as well. But you may have an underrepresented group who kind of thinks, well, why would I apply to a housing association for a community grant for, why would they want to support us? And I think we need to put that out there from day one, to say, absolutely, we want to celebrate what our communities are doing in every single form, and we want you to be part of that decision making process. Because my lived experience, and I'd make completely different decisions. It's the same as any kind of tenant engagement. We want to hear everybody's voice and there to be true representation.
I went down to a board down in Hampshire maybe about 6 months ago and had exactly that conversation, because they said, look, we've got, we feel we're representative. I was like, okay, well, don't please talk outwardly, but have you got any members from the LGBTQ community? Have you got anybody from the, you've told me you've got a traveller community within here, and you've got 15 members of the board. Where's their representation? Where's their voice? And there was no tenants on the panel. And again, I couldn't agree with you more. Arthur's mentioned there, we need to do things, don't just do things like Pride and Eid for staff. I don't think it'd be too difficult if in that onboarding process you simply said, by the way, are there any holidays or national events that you like to celebrate, and get those dates in the diary, and then get those to your social media team. I'm aware it's 12 o'clock. Normally I'd have no issue letting it run over, but actually in half an hour, I've got Meena Kumari coming on talking diversity, but also domestic abuse and other things. It's going to be a LinkedIn live session. You guys, if anybody wants to join, it's just on LinkedIn. You can type in questions. You don't need to be on camera or anything like that, but we're happy to have guests. But for now, thank you everybody for an incredible conversation. That one really, really flew through. I feel there's a lot more that we can go on from this, and if anybody would like to do a follow-up on this, please let me know, particularly if there's something you'd like to do. And Graham, I hope there's been a lot of interesting information for you both, and thank you for bringing this to the table, because I feel it's really important. And until next week, please look after yourselves. I was just trying to find out what next week's topic is on, because I've had a complete mind blank. We've got Emily Orme coming in, and this is going to be a controversial one, so looking forward to it. Does there need to be a qualification in housing for you to work in the sector? Some kind of qualification? Does there need to be some kind of base level qualification for you to work in the sector? It's going to be a really interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to it. Until then, thank you everybody for joining today, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon. Cheers.